I always thought we had a perfect relationship. My partner and I had been together for over 4 years, and I believed everything was going great, until one innocent question changed everything. Our days were filled with the kind of routine that only long-term couples can understand. Weekends spent binge-watching our favorite shows, evenings cooking dinner together, and quiet nights in bed talking about anything and everything. It was a comfortable, peaceful life. We shared hobbies, had inside jokes, and there was this unspoken understanding between us that seemed unbreakable. I thought we were happy, maybe even happier than most people. The kind of couple everyone envied. But as time passed, something started to shift. At first, I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. Little things, like him being on his phone more than usual, or suddenly being unavailable on random days. I brushed it off, thinking maybe he was just busy with work, or maybe just needed some space. But there was always this nagging feeling in the back of my mind that something wasn't quite right. I convinced myself it was nothing. After all, we were in a committed relationship. We were happy, right? One evening, it all came to a head. We were sitting at my sister's house for dinner, surrounded by family. The laughter filled the room, and everything seemed perfectly normal. My partner was quieter than usual, but I thought it was just the noise of the crowd getting to him. It was then, during a simple conversation, that I asked him a question that seemed harmless at the time, something everyone asks in relationships. "How was your day today, honey?" It was just a casual question, nothing special. But when he answered, it was rushed, almost like he was avoiding it. He gave a quick, vague response, and immediately changed the subject to something else. It didn't seem like a big deal at first, but something about the way he reacted left me unsettled.
I tried to shake off the feeling, thinking I was overthinking things. But the rest of the night, I couldn't help but notice that he was acting differently. His answers were short, and he kept glancing at his phone, which he usually left face down when we were around family. I had no reason to suspect anything, but something felt off. That night, as we got home, I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my head. The way he avoided my question, the way he seemed distant. Over the next few days, I started noticing more small inconsistencies. He was spending more time on his phone, but when I asked about it, he brushed it off, saying it was just work stuff. He seemed more distracted when we were together, often lost in thought, as if his mind was somewhere else. The trust I had always placed in him began to waver, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't ignore my instincts. I didn't want to believe it, but the doubt began to creep in. I decided to ask him again about his day, this time in private. His response was the same, brief and evasive. But when I glanced at his phone later, I saw something that made my heart stop. There, right in front of me, was a message that shouldn't have been there. A name I didn't recognize, a message that seemed too intimate to ignore. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, trying to piece everything together. Could this be real? Was my partner having an affair? I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I couldn't believe it, but the evidence was undeniable. I sat there, staring at the screen, heartbroken and confused. How long had this been going on? Why didn't I see the signs? Every little thing that had seemed so insignificant before now felt like a piece of the puzzle that I had missed. The thoughts were spinning in my head, but one thing was clear. I had to confront him. The next evening when he came home, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I asked him straight out about the messages I had found, my voice trembling as I spoke. He denied it at first, acting shocked, but I could see it in his eyes. The guilt, the fear. As the seconds passed, his defenses crumbled, and he finally admitted to the affair. The words cut through me like a knife, and I felt my world shatter around me. I couldn't comprehend it. The person I had trusted, the one I had shared so much with, had betrayed me in a way I never expected. He apologized over and over, saying it was a mistake, that it meant nothing. But those words didn't comfort me. They only made it worse. I felt like I was drowning in emotions, anger, sadness, confusion, all swirling together in a storm that I couldn't escape. I wanted answers. Why? How could this happen? We were supposed to be a team, and yet, in that moment, I realized how easily everything could fall apart. I had spent so many years believing in our connection, in our trust, and now it was all in question. It wasn't just the affair that hurt, it was the betrayal of everything I had believed in. How could someone lie like that, look me in the eye every day, and hide something so huge? I knew I had a decision to make. I could try to fix things, work through it, but could I ever trust him again? Would I ever be able to look at him the same way? Or was it better to walk away, to start over, to reclaim my sense of self? The future seemed so uncertain, and yet one thing was clear. The innocent question I had asked that night had exposed a truth I never thought I would face. Our life together felt like a well-oiled machine, moving along without a hitch. We had a routine that I cherished, a rhythm that felt so comfortable, so right. Weekdays were filled with work, but every evening we would reconnect over dinner. Sometimes it was something simple, like pasta or homemade pizza, but those evenings were always special to me. We'd talk about our day, share little jokes, and sometimes we'd even reminisce about the early days of our relationship. It was a sense of familiarity I grew to love. On weekends, we would go for long walks, visit local coffee shops, or take small weekend trips to nearby towns. Those little getaways were our time to unwind, to laugh, and to remember why we had chosen each other in the first place. There was a kind of peace in the simplicity of it all. But I didn't see it then. How little things were changing, bit by bit. Our dinners, once filled with easy conversation, began to feel a little less vibrant. I couldn't put my finger on it. My partner seemed distant, sometimes lost in thought, staring out the window during dinner or retreating to their phone after a few words. At first, I thought it was just the stress from work. After all, we both had demanding jobs, and maybe that's why he seemed so distracted. But instead of talking about it, I convinced myself that it was normal. Everyone had their moments, right? It didn't mean anything. There were other moments too, ones I ignored, thinking they were just part of the ebb and flow of life. Like the way he would sometimes cancel plans at the last minute, or how he started working late more often. But even then, I justified it. Maybe there was something going on at work, something that required his attention. I remember one evening, we had planned to go out for dinner, and at the last second, he told me he had to stay late at the office. I was disappointed, sure, but I didn't think much of it. It happens, I thought. He's probably just busy. It became a pattern over time. The phone calls that would last just a little too long, the sudden bursts of energy in his responses when I asked about his day, but then the brief silences when I'd push further. Each time, I let it slide, not wanting to make a big deal out of something that could have been nothing. But looking back now, I realize those little changes should have been red flags. I just didn't see them at the time. I was so caught up in the comfort of our routine, in the belief that we had something solid, that I overlooked the subtle distance growing between us. And the biggest sign, the one I now recognize as a glaring warning, was his increasing attachment to his phone. It started with him checking it more often, not just for work emails, but for texts, messages, and notifications that he would quickly glance at, then quickly hide. I thought he was just busy, maybe dealing with something urgent, but in hindsight, I can't help but wonder if I was just too naive to see it. He'd always been a little reserved about his personal space, but this was different. His phone was becoming an obsession. He'd keep it face down on the table when we were out, something he never did before. And when I asked him about it, he'd brush it off, giving me that half-hearted smile, telling me it was just work stuff or nothing to worry about. It should have felt like a warning, shouldn't it? But at the time, I just nodded, told myself it was nothing. After all, we had trust, and that's all that mattered, right? Looking back, I can see it all now. The subtle signs that I brushed off, the changes in behavior that I ignored because I didn't want to question the foundation of our relationship. I thought we were happy, that nothing could shake what we had. But I should have paid attention, should have seen that my partner was becoming someone I didn't recognize. It all started one evening when we were having dinner at my sister's place. It was one of those evenings that felt like a snapshot of normalcy. The kind you take for granted when everything seems just right. The house was full of laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the warmth that comes from being surrounded by family. My sister had made her famous lasagna, and we were all enjoying the meal, teasing each other and swapping stories from the week. It was a comfortable, familiar setting, the kind of night that you'd expect to be uneventful. I remember how we sat across from each other, me and my partner, surrounded by the people who meant the most to us. My partner was quieter than usual, but I didn't think much of it. He had always been a little more reserved when we were around my family, especially after a long work week. But we had been together for so long, and it didn't bother me anymore. I had just gotten used to his quiet moments, chalking it up to his introverted nature. Still, something about his demeanor that evening felt different. He seemed distracted, like his mind was elsewhere. At some point, during a lull in the conversation, I asked a seemingly harmless question. "How was your day today, honey?" It was a routine question, one I had asked countless times before, but this time, his response was different. There was something about the way he said it, almost rushed. He gave a quick, vague answer, something like, "It was fine, just a regular day." And then he immediately shifted the conversation. "How about you? How was your day?" he asked, as if he couldn't wait for me to talk. I brushed it off, not thinking much of it. Maybe he was just tired from the week, or perhaps he didn't feel like getting into details. But as the evening went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was this strange disconnect between us that I couldn't put my finger on. His answers were short, and his eyes kept drifting to his phone. He wasn't fully engaged in the conversation the way he usually was, and he seemed more interested in checking his messages than in participating in the family banter. I tried to push the feeling aside, thinking I was being paranoid. It was a busy week after all, and I knew he had a lot on his plate with work. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more it nagged at me. I couldn't help but notice how he kept looking at his phone under the table, his fingers tapping quickly on the screen. It wasn't the first time I had seen him do this, but it was the first time I really paid attention to it. And then there was the way he deflected my question, almost as if he didn't want to share anything with me. We got through the rest of the evening without incident, but that moment stuck with me. Later, as we were driving home, I glanced over at him in the passenger seat. He was staring out the window, lost in thought, his face unreadable. I wanted to ask him about it, but I didn't. I didn't want to come off as needy or overbearing. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. It was such a small thing, just a simple question, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was the beginning of something much bigger, something I wasn't ready to face. The next few days unfolded like any other. We continued our routine, work, dinner together, quiet evenings. But I couldn't forget that moment. It replayed in my mind over and over again, like a broken record. I started to pay more attention to his actions, his words. It was as though I was seeing him through a new lens, questioning everything I had once trusted. Why had he reacted so oddly to such a simple question? Why had he been so distracted, so quick to change the subject. I told myself I was just overthinking it, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That one question, that innocent inquiry into his day, had exposed a crack in the foundation of our relationship. It was subtle at first, something I could have easily overlooked. But now, in the aftermath, I couldn't ignore the unease that had settled in my chest. What was he hiding? What had changed? I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something I wasn't prepared to uncover. In the days following that dinner, the feeling that something was off lingered, gnawing at me in a way I couldn't quite shake. I had never been one to question my partner's actions, never had the need to. But now, everything felt different. I started replaying our interactions in my mind, dissecting his every word, every glance, and every gesture. What had been a casual, unspoken trust between us now seemed fragile, as though it could crack at any moment. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was overthinking. After all, relationships go through phases, and maybe he was just stressed. But the more I thought about it, the more things didn't add up. I began to pay closer attention to his behavior. There were the small things, like how he avoided eye contact when I asked simple questions. A few days after the dinner, I asked him about a work project, something light, just making conversation. He answered quickly, barely looking up from his phone, then immediately changed the topic. I couldn't ignore the way he started to withdraw, even when we were together. It was subtle, but I began to notice that his usual warmth was missing. When we'd sit down to watch TV, he'd be glued to his phone, barely paying attention to the show. Or worse, pretending to be interested while his mind was somewhere else. I would try to make conversation, ask him how his day went, and his answers were always rushed, too curt. He didn't elaborate, didn't ask me about my day in return, which was unusual for him. It was like a wall had been built between us, and I couldn't find a way to break through. The turning point came one evening when I asked him a simple question. "Where were you last night? You didn't text me back." His reaction was instant, too instant. He froze, his face went pale for a moment, and then he laughed nervously. "I was just out with some friends," he said, avoiding my gaze. But there was something in his voice, something off, like he was trying to convince himself of the answer more than me. I pressed a little further, asking which friends he'd been with. And then came the hesitation. Just a couple of guys from work," he replied, his eyes still glued to the screen of his phone, not meeting mine. I felt the familiar tug of suspicion in my gut, the way he had reacted, the way he had avoided my eyes. It all felt wrong. I had never thought I'd become suspicious, but the more I looked, the more I started noticing things I couldn't ignore. It was subtle at first, but I felt a shift. The next time I asked about his day, I made sure to listen carefully. He told me about a meeting he had, but the details were fuzzy. When I asked for more specifics, he gave vague answers, dodging questions like he didn't want to elaborate. That was strange. He had always been someone who liked to share details, to let me in on what was going on in his life. But now? It was as if he was keeping a part of himself hidden, a part I couldn't reach. And then came the little discrepancies in his stories. One evening, we were talking about a trip we had planned, and he mentioned a conversation he had with a friend about it. But when I asked about the friend, his response was quick, too quick. "Just someone from work." The name never came up, just a vague reference. That didn't sit right with me. He always talked about his friends in such a personal way. Why the sudden mystery? At this point, I couldn't help but dig a little deeper. I asked about the trip again, about this supposed conversation, and each time his answers were different, conflicting details, a changing timeline. Something was off, and the pieces weren't fitting together. My gut told me I wasn't imagining things, but I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to be the person who doubted their partner, but the more I probed, the more the cracks in his story became obvious. It was a strange feeling to realize, but I felt like I was losing him. The person I had known, the person I had trusted without question, was becoming a stranger in my eyes. The lies, if that's what they were, had started to pile up, and I was left with the uncomfortable task of deciding whether to confront him or continue ignoring the growing distance. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that something had changed between us. And whatever it was something I hadn't signed up for. I couldn't shake the feeling anymore. It was like a dark cloud that hung over me, no matter how much I tried to push it away. The little inconsistencies in his stories, the strange defensiveness, the way he kept his phone glued to his hand, it all added up to something that I couldn't ignore. I wasn't the type to snoop, to invade his privacy, but I couldn't help myself. I had to know the truth. One afternoon, when he was out of the house, I found myself standing in front of his desk, staring at the small, locked drawer where he kept his phone and a few personal items. I hesitated. I knew it wasn't right. But the doubt had grown so loud in my head, so consuming, that I couldn't stop myself. I told myself I would only look for a few minutes, just enough to ease my mind. I needed answers. I opened the drawer slowly, as if the action itself would be enough to break some unspoken rule. There, in the corner, was his phone. It wasn't hidden, but something about it felt wrong. I picked it up, heart pounding in my chest, and unlocked it with the code I had memorized. My hands were trembling, and I almost expected the phone to burn my skin as I swiped through the apps. I told myself to be quick, just check his messages and call it a day. But as I opened his texts, the first thing that struck me was how empty his inbox looked. There were messages from work, from friends, from family, but there was one thread that stood out. It was with a name I didn't recognize. It wasn't someone from work, not a family member, not even one of his friends. Just a name that felt foreign, unwelcomed. My stomach dropped. I clicked on it, my heart racing. The conversation was long, filled with flirtatious comments, inside jokes, and a level of intimacy that made my chest tighten. I couldn't believe what I was reading, the words, the promises, the plans they had made together. It all hit me like a ton of bricks. I scrolled down, desperate to find something, anything that would make it stop feeling real. But it was all there, in black and white. The final message was the one that shattered everything. It was a picture of the two of them together. The caption read, "Can't wait to see you tonight, babe. I miss you." My breath caught in my throat. I dropped the phone onto the desk as if it had burned me, and for a moment, everything felt like it was spinning. I had seen it. There was no denying it now. The person I had loved, the one I had trusted with everything, had been lying to me. I stumbled back, my legs unsteady, as if the ground beneath me had been ripped away. My mind raced in a million directions, unable to process what I had just uncovered. How had I missed this? How had I not seen the signs? The disbelief was overwhelming. I felt like I was outside my body, watching this horrible scene unfold from a distance. I had spent so much time trying to convince myself that everything was fine, that this was just a phase, that I was imagining things. But now, the truth was in front of me, undeniable. He had been seeing someone else, lying, sneaking around behind my back, and I had been completely unaware. Anger, confusion, and heartbreak surged through me in waves, each feeling more intense than the last. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make it all stop, but the shock kept me paralyzed. I couldn't understand how it had happened. We had shared so much. We had made plans, built a life together. How could he betray me like this? How could he do this to us? The tears came slowly at first, like a quiet trickle, but soon they were streaming down my face, blurring my vision. I felt so alone, so lost, as if the world had turned upside down and there was no one I could trust anymore. My mind kept replaying every moment we had spent together, the dinners, the quiet nights, the trips we had taken, and now it all felt like a lie. Every word, every touch, every shared look was tainted by the knowledge that, all along, he had been hiding this from me. I stood there for what felt like hours, just staring at the phone. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to confront him right away, to demand answers, to make him explain himself. But another part of me couldn't bear the thought of seeing the hurt in his eyes, the guilt in his voice. I wasn't ready to face him yet. Not like this. But the truth was clear now. The reality I had been living in was shattered, and I had no choice but to confront it. And to confront him. The man I had loved, trusted, and built a life with had been lying to me, and now I had to figure out what came next. What was left of us? What did this mean for the future we had once dreamed of? I didn't know. But for the first time in a long while, I felt completely lost. I sat there, staring at the phone in my hands, the words still burning into my mind. I didn't know what to do next, but one thing was clear. I couldn't just let this go. I had to confront him. I had to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. He came home later that evening, as usual, and we exchanged the typical pleasantries. But I couldn't focus on anything he said. My mind was a whirlwind of questions, of emotions. I felt like I was choking on the words I needed to say. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence, I turned to him. "I need to talk to you about something," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me, confused but calm, as if nothing had changed. "What's going on?" he asked, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the hint of unease in his tone. I pulled out the phone from my pocket and placed it on the table between us, my hands trembling. "I know about the messages," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. "I saw the pictures. I know about the affair." For a moment, he just stared at me, his face draining of color. Then he laughed nervously, the kind of laugh that didn't belong. "What are you talking about? What messages? You've got it all wrong." But I could see it in his eyes. The guilt was there, unmistakable, like an open book. His usual confidence had crumbled, and I could feel the shift in the air. He wasn't fooling anyone. "I'm not wrong," I said softly, my throat tight. "I've seen everything, the texts, the photos. You can't deny it anymore. It's all there." He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, looking away from me. His gaze darted to the phone, but he didn't reach for it. Instead, he took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to face the inevitable. "Look, it's not what you think," he said, his voice strained. "You don't understand." The words cut through me like a knife. "Not what I think?" I repeated, incredulous. "What do you mean, not what I think? I've seen everything, all the proof I need. How could you do this to me, to us?" He sighed deeply, his face racked with guilt. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did." He paused, avoiding my eyes. "I got caught up in something. It wasn't supposed to be like this.